Thanks for joining us online at the 2020 NSS Cave Conservation and Management Tuesday Talks. This is part of our overview series of current best practices in cave conservation and restoration. Our module on Speleothem repair will follow a brief introduction. Primum non nocere. The first principle for everything caving is do no harm. By way of introduction, here we are. My husband,
Jim Worker,
and me, Val Hildreth Worker. We serve the National Speleological Society in the U.S. as Conservation Division Chiefs. This is our big book of cave conservation and management. Published by the NSS with support from the National Cave and Karst Research Institute, the volume offers 600 pages with 46 peer-reviewed contributors who all collaborated in defining current best practices. The book describes state-of-the-art science-based theory, strategy, and a lot of nose-to-the-flowstone practical techniques. This is not the last word in conservation. The book encourages evolving processes and finding new minimum impact solutions informed by science, technology, and field experience. Cave environments can be restored. We can't take a passage back to a completely pristine state, but we can restore to a former condition. We can help promote a return to ecological balance. For example, human activity can introduce harmful things into cave habitats like industrial particulates, lint, residue. Over time, the anthropogenic impact builds up and changes the native ecosystem, but it can also be cleaned up, and the spelean habitat can be restored to a former state. Here's how we found this cave entrance. Yes, graffiti can be cleaned up, but only after careful inventory and assessment for cultural and historic markings. Contemporary graffiti is tediously removed, and the cave is restored to a more natural state. A cave pool before we cleaned it, with silt left by careless footsteps tromping through clean aquatic habitat, and after delicate restoration to a more pristine state. Other modules in our series will address minimum impact restoration theory and techniques for all these delicate cave tasks. This module introduces Speleothem repair. Here's how we found this broken stalagmite, and later in the talk, we'll show you the repair process. Speleothem is another word for cave formation. Speleothems are secondary deposits in caves and include stalagmites, stalactites, helictites, rimstones, flowstones, and so on. This was a tall, skinny totem tumbled by vandals. It may be a simple repair.
When first came upon this breakage, I noticed that there was a lot of water dripping onto what was left of the formation. So my first approach to this was to go ahead and see if I could stack it up and then just leave it set and heal naturally rather than using epoxies.
And over time, it did heal. After about a year, this Speleothem was solid. When you do need to glue a Speleothem, what do you use? We recommend a museum-grade epoxy that's proven effective in cave habitats, minimal outgassing, longevity, as cave-safe as possible with current technology. Our current choice for epoxy is the Buehler Lab and Museum-grade product, Epoxy Cure 2 resin and hardener. You start with 1 part hardener in the mixing cup, and now adding 4 parts of the Epoxy Cure resin. Next comes a gentle mixing of the 2 parts. Avoid air bubbles. Gently fold and blend the 2 parts for only 3 minutes. Literally time yourself, and this product works beautifully for strength and stability. It starts out very liquid and begins to thicken a bit in the first 30 minutes. Use a very thin layer of epoxy. Keep the epoxy away from the edges. More is not better. It'll squish out and create a big mess around the seam. A thin spread of epoxy in the middle of the break. The weight of the Speleothem will spread the epoxy. Depending on temperature and humidity, the epoxy will take 24 to 72 hours to fully cure. Broken Speleothems come in all shapes and sizes. Some will discolor over time when separated. multiple interlocking pieces. Find that fit and immediately mark it. Don't grind away the edges and nuances of your tight fit. Avoid excessive handling. Find the matches and mark across the joints with a pencil. When it fits, it will sort of click into place. You can feel the click fit. For tools, you'll need battery-powered drills, hammer drill, a Dremel tool is useful, a variety of pliers and cutters, mixing cups and mixing sticks, powder-free exam gloves, soft brushes, and a wire brush. Other basic tools and supplies include the drill, all-thread stainless steel rod, museum-grade epoxy, vinyl or nitrile gloves, drop sheet, extra battery and drill bits, soft brushes, canned air is good for blowing dust out of drill holes, a fresh Sharpie, and a zippy bag to catch the drill dust. Austenitic stainless steel products will not expand with time or temperature change. Never use other metals that will expand and re-break the Speleothem. We also recommend Hot Stuff Special T as a more archival, oil-free cyanoacrylate fast adhesive. Really big Speleothems can be repaired, both stalagmites and stalactites. This was a big, heavy repair on a slope near a drop, so both Jim and the Speleothem have a safety rope. In the upper piece, drill a tight fit for the epoxy to hold a stainless steel pin. Keep it tidy and collect the drill dust for later use. Clean the drill dust out of the hole. Canned air works best. Always epoxy your stainless all-thread pin into the top piece of the break. Allow it 24 hours to cure. In the lower section, drill a little larger hole to accept the pin. This will give you wiggle room for adjustments. Half fill it with epoxy when you're ready to fit the two pieces in place. This diagram outlines the process. If you need to fill gaps and seams, mix the drill dust with your cave-safe epoxy to make a slurry. This thicker mixture will adhere and fill gaps, seams, and cracks, but when you have a tight seam naturally, none of this is necessary. This repair had a huge gap between the pieces.
In this case, I used small rocks to level it up because it had grown a lot from water dripping on it on one side. This worked very well, and then I came back and put the dust with the epoxy to fill in the rest of it.
This becomes an artistic process. With good color matching and careful application of the slurry, you can fill the gap and match the natural texture of the Speleothem. How do we rehang stalactites? Same principles. Drill and epoxy your stainless all-thread into the upper section. Drill a larger hole in the lower piece and half fill with epoxy to accept the stainless support pin. Cut the inky tip off a fresh Sharpie. Put that ink tip where you want your drill hole. Match up the two pieces with your click fit, and the two ink spots show you exactly where to drill your holes for the stainless all-thread stabilizing pin. Always epoxy pins into the upper sections. This is one of 3 broken parts on a 230-pound stalactite. Create some sort of device to lift and apply tension as the joint cures. This long, heavy 3-piece stalactite is positioned at the bottom of a stairway. It broke when a visitor tripped and fell against it. Thus, we cordoned it off, used a homemade jack and sawhorse, and left the first top piece of the repair to cure for a couple of weeks before we returned to install the next pieces. Takes a hefty team to maneuver pieces like this into that tight fit. All sorts of tools, clever devices, bungees, simple boards can be used to support and apply tension while the epoxy cures. Remove the props and start the finish work. For this repair, we were able to finish and blend the seams with only sandpaper. This long, heavy stalactite repair is complete and hanging pretty again. In this vandalized cave passage, we're dealing with hundreds of chunks of gypsum crust. First job is always find the matching pieces. You know for sure it fits when you find the click fit and the texture matches. Only need a thin line of epoxy on the edge and hold it in place with small bungees, padded clamps, rubber bands. Jim is looking at a huge swath of vandalized gypsum crust. Heavy chunks of gypsum were literally chopped out of this hole with hatchets. This one looks like an obvious fit, but it wasn't easy to find. Bungees and PV supports hold tension while the epoxy cures. As the pieces build in, filling, camouflaging, and reinforcing the seams, after several days for the epoxy to cure, it's time to remove the bungees. We still have some missing chunks to find on this one. And in this kind of repair, we reinforce and camouflage the joints using epoxy and sand or soil from the floor to color match. Mix to the right consistency. And in a wider joint like this, you fill in that gap with your epoxy and cave dust mixture. Then artistically camouflage it by brushing over the whole thing lightly with several colors from the cave floor. Here's the before and after of the final dusting before the epoxy starts to harden. Draperies can be tough to repair, but you can wire large sections together. Drill holes above and below the break. Use a Dremel tool to grind grooves between the holes. Bring the pieces together with epoxy and wire. Brush the wires, push the wires into the grooves, and camouflage with epoxy and rock dust slurry. For small light pieces, use an oil-free archival cyanoacrylate adhesive. We recommend Hot Stuff Special T, an oil-free, quick-set adhesive developed for the model building industry. It's also good for repairing helictites and soda straws, available online and in hobby shops. Sunlight can help you work the puzzle and color match. Mark across each joint for a quick fit. Large, heavier pieces require epoxy. We have fabricated small areas, but only to fill in missing sections. In this case, we made a form with clear tape and poured in a mixture of epoxy and fine rock dust. Later, we added subsequent layers of epoxy slurry and worked it during the curing process to replicate the Speleothem texture. Hang the piece and go back with a Dremel tool to touch up and blend the texturing. This area is wet, so the color will recover over time. For this complex, heavy repair, we used only bungee tension and the Buhler epoxy. This group of speleothems consists of multiple interlocking crystalline stalactites.
These cannot be drilled with a hammer drill because they will shatter when you start to drill them. So we just use the epoxy and the hardener to put these together.
We couldn't use stabilizing pins. Instead, we rebuilt it upside down against a corner wall and held our epoxy click fits with strategically placed sponges, foam, cardboard, bungees, and allowed each new piece to cure overnight before we added the next one. Reconstructing the interlocking breaks of this style group from the bottom up, we used only the Buhler epoxy cure, strategic tension, and the inherent weight of each new section. Here's the start of rigging Jim's bungee tension system to rehang the style group. A bungee is wrapped around up above the break points, then added bungees hanging from that first wrap, prepped for the next step of accepting the heavy repaired style group, which also has a bungee pre-positioned around it. Lift that style group up into a place, adjust the bottom piece using the bungees to pull tension in the proper directions and achieve the click fit. Tweaking and marking across the click fit, and checking the secure bungee tension hold on the joint as the Buhler epoxy soaks into the crystalline break and starts to cure. Several days later, we carefully remove the bungees. The repair is secure. Now, for the other 4-foot-long, 45-pound interlocking style group, the one we rebuilt against the wall. It's heavy, it's crystalline, we couldn't drill it for a stabilizing pin. And in the second photo, the click fit is holding with only our epoxy, bungees, and a fulcrum device. Bungees are pulling that break point together up above. Longer bungees from the board down to the ladder are pulling down to create a simple upward tension on the fulcrum board, which is pushing up against the bottom tip of the stalactite group. We left these bungee and fulcrum systems in place for several weeks to assure a strong bond. The finished repair. If this area is wet or intermittently wet, over time, new calcite deposits will reinforce the repaired breaks. Leave no trace, do no harm. Says it all. Minimum impact caving. Protect the caves and what they harbor. Thank you for joining us. We welcome questions and discussion. Please feel free to contact us with your comments, questions, ideas. Jim Worker at caves.org and Val Hildreth Worker at caves.org.